So question one, how do you interpret meritocracy from the aspect of diversity? How does it influence the screening process in gifted education? And I'm hoping people are hearing me. So with regard to question one, how do you interpret meritocracy from the aspect of diversity? I think, of course, when we think about gifted education, right, we think about the students at the top end of the distribution. And so certainly a student who is doing very well, we want to put in a gifted and talented program. We want to give them the education they want. When we come to diversity, of course, there are students from diverse groups. There are students from underrepresented groups who, in fact, will qualify on the basis of very high scores. But if we are interested in increasing the diversity in gifted and talented education programs, we also need to recognize that some students from underrepresented groups do not have the educational and social capital. They do not have the scores that will qualify them in the normal process. And so that's why we talk about what do we want gifted to represent. If giftedness is going to be about adult performance, we need to give more children and adolescents the chance to develop into giftedness. And so that we can actually broaden the people that we have. We will take the ones who would make it in normally, but we can also, in fact, have criteria that allows us to do enrichment with other students who then, over the course of time, will actually increase their performance and can make contributions as adults. Right? And so that's what it does for the screening process. It means that we need to broaden our screening process so that we are not just using an IQ of 130. We may then want to identify kids with IQs of 120, for example, who then we would give enrichment education, but we want to do those identifications as early as possible. We also want to make sure that we do identification throughout the education process for students who are later developing, who then get an opportunity to get in. So that's question one. With regard to question two, thank you so much. I'm curious, what is your vision on using dynamic testing for getting more diversity in gifted and talented education? I'm not sure what is meant by dynamic testing. I'm not familiar with that phrase. I'm thinking that, so what comes to mind for me is actually focusing on different aspects of testing so that, in fact, a student who may be very good in one domain but not another, and I'm fine with a student. Let's say there's a student who does not have an IQ score. I mean, and if you're using IQ score of 130, but is extremely good in mathematics or is extremely good in some other domain, that student should get gifted and talented education, even if they do not make the cut score, the general cut score on IQ. Because what you can do is you can use their performance in the domain to place them, because they will benefit from accelerated or enriched education in the specific domain. I hope as I said, I'm not familiar with the term dynamic testing, so I hope that that's what you are getting at. Is mentoring a possible way of supporting children of low SES? Yep, so I think it is one way that you can do it. I think at the end of the day, a lot of what we are doing in gifted and talented education is, in fact, doing educational supplemental education, right? So we are giving students a broader education, a deeper education, a more accelerated education than they would receive in their normal classrooms, right? If we are identifying students who don't have scores at the very top of the distribution, mentoring is one way of doing that. One of the things we have done at our program here at Berkeley is that when we have students who are coming from underrepresented backgrounds, students who, in fact, their scores may not be quite as high as some of the other student scores, we build in addition to their class, we build in a support with undergraduates at UC Berkeley who we use to support them. So they, instead of taking one class in the morning and then going home like all the other students do, or class in the afternoon, these students have a support lab on the other side of the day where they are getting sort of a small group or one-on-one support to help them engage with the material. And what we found is if we start that in around age 10, 11, 12, By the time the students are in the later aspects of high school, they don't need those support classes anymore. The mentoring in those early classes was sufficient to get them up to speed, because in essence we lift the boat. We bring them up. Question 4. Thank you for this insightful lecture. Do you think that positive discrimination can be a solution for underrepresentation? If yes, how can we be fair towards the overrepresented high achiever groups? This, of course, is one of the biggest concerns, I think, that comes up in this space, right? So in the United States, as a case in point, I'm at UC Berkeley, and we have 30% people of Asian Americans, even though they're not that percentage in the state. We only have 2% African Americans. The idea here is not to say, let's admit fewer Asian Americans and admit more African Americans, so that you don't want to just admit students. Students who have qualified, you want to admit them. What we're trying to do is broaden, right? So what we are saying is let's actually increase the number of kids that we are providing gifted education to, right? So that students from groups who are underrepresented get to see more and more of themselves in there. If we are successful in doing enrichment early on, and we continue to do this, I mean, it's a long-term strategy, but if we are successful, it will equalize over time as we will get people more into the population, right? So you will, as kids who were not who admitted with a lower score, but then they go through, they do well, their kids will get into these programs. So I think we need to be very careful that we are not excluding kids who have qualified via the normal way. We are just actually creating more spaces to serve more students from groups that have not qualified and have not typically qualified and who do not see themselves as part of this process. Thank you for your comment. Just a very interesting and important topic from multiple perspectives. I'm glad that you found it interesting. And my apologies to all of you for not being able to get the Microsoft Teams to work. Question 5. Dynamic testing is a form of testing where you measure the learning potential of children. So the children are not selected by score for the program, but by learning potential. Yep, so I would agree. This is the talent development approach, right? The problem is that it doesn't get rid. So I agree. We should be selecting kids on the basis of potential. But there are people who would argue that the IQ score is a measure of potential, right? So if we just go on potential, on scores that indicate high potential, we will still have underrepresentation. So that in and of itself will not take care of the problem of underrepresentation, because the groups that are now underrepresented are also underrepresented on the potential measures, right? So that's why we need to broaden who we serve in the early grades, because to give students who may not be showing the high potential that others are showing, but who have potential, we need to broaden it so that they get enriched education, so that when they are older, they actually qualify on the basis, of that learning potential. But it's not going to start there. We are not going to solve underrepresentation just with that, because the distribution, the unequalness of scores that we see that in every kind of test, even tests of potential. Can well-being and resilience be a focus of diversity programs? Right. So I would argue that resilience and well-being should be a part of all programs, including diversity programs. So, and let me explain what I mean by that, right? So many students who are doing well in school, right, they're doing very well. They find school very easily. Even in the gifted and talented program, they find that they're not being stretched. If their well-being is not taken into consideration, if they're not being taught to cope when things get hard, for them, it may not be in middle school or high school, it could be in college, they are going to be less likely to be able to cope. So we really need to teach coping skills, teach processes to be resilient to all kids. With regard to diversity programs in particular, one aspect of resilience, if we think about it, is social, right? Do I believe that I can succeed in this domain? Are there people who look like me who have succeeded in this domain? And so that's one of the reasons why it's important to get students from underrepresented groups and have a cohort, because so then you want to teach them, right? But you also want to teach them skills. It's not enough to teach, to talk about well-being and resilience, right? We need to teach them to do good work in the domain. So you need to do both the social emotional supports as well as the academic work. They need to get both, I would argue. Thank you. Next question. Should gifted education programs specialize according to domains? So I would say yes, yes, but. So yeah, I do think that in fact, one way of serving more kids and increasing diversity is to specialize by domains. And the talent development mega model that Dr. Ojasi Kobilius, Dr. Zabotnik, and I have done speaks to the importance of domains. So if somebody is very good in science, they should be accelerated, get enrichment in science. If somebody is very good in mathematics, they should accelerate, get that in mathematics. So that's true. What we do know, though, right, is that some students don't necessarily know what domains they're good in, right? So that's why IQ has traditionally been used as a measure to identify kids for gifted and talented education, because IQ is a general purpose academic indicator. So IQ is a general indicator of learning potential across domains. So that if you actually have students who have high IQs, it actually is saying that they are probably going to do well academically, right? So then they can then choose where they want to specialize, but they have general learning potential that you can actually then expose to a variety of domains. And some of them may then get to choose on their passion. So if I'm equally good in mathematics, science, and humanities, language arts, I again get to choose which is the passion for me, which I like best, and then I can choose that domain to specialize in. But domains is a really important place to think about, particularly for those who don't have the highest IQs. As president of APA, what do you think? Where's the place of educational psychology, gifted education in the 21st century? New tendencies, new paradigms. That's an interesting question. What I will say is this. It really is important, I think, to expose children and young children, especially children in elementary school, to a wide range of domains, topics, and so forth, and not just academic domains. So the academic domains, but sport, the visual and performing arts, and so forth. While the purpose of schooling is academics, there are many students who may be talented in an area that is not an academic area. They may be talented in football. They may be talented in music, and so forth. But if they do not get exposure, right, we are not going to know that they have talents in those domains. Individuals who are underrepresented, often, one group is individuals from low-income households. So if they do not have the wherewithal, the funds, the money to allow their students to follow their passions, their non-academic passions, and the school does not expose the students to these passions, their students will never discover that they have talents. And so from my point of view, what our task is in the 21st century is really to ensure that all children, as many children as possible, but ideally all children, get exposed to as wide a variety of domains as possible for a number of years in their early educational experiences, so that we can discover where their passions are, where their talents lie, and ultimately maximize the amount of individuals from all backgrounds who end up being able to develop their talents. And if we think about new things, right, we now have, there's now snowboarding, right? So skiing used to be the ultimate sport. There's now a sport called snowboarding. And so that's a new sport that has come on board. Somebody came up with the idea of snowboarding as opposed to skiing. We now have people who are doing visual and performing arts on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, right? And so they're developing skills in manipulating content and so forth. These are all things that would not have happened if these platforms did not exist. And so there always needs to be room to see what's the new thing. And as we come up with new things, some people whose talents may not have been recognized before, we now have the opportunity to recognize their talents in these new platforms or on these new platforms. Okay, here's another question. Is bringing more children to level of proficiency mainly education policy? No, I think it's not. I think it goes beyond policy. I mean, I really do think it goes to the heart of education practice. So I'm going to use some numbers here. I'm making up these numbers as an explanation to clarify the explanation. So we know, for example, that 80% of African American youth in the United States, for example, are reading below basic. Nobody believes that 80% of African American youth are intellectually disabled, right? The percentage of youth who are intellectually disabled or reading disabled is much smaller, right? It's a much smaller percentage of the population. What this means is that there are a lot of students who are actually have average or above average intelligence who in fact are not reading at proficient level, right? And so therefore what that says to me is that our education practice, our teaching is not effective. And so what we need to do is we need to investigate where is this disconnect happening. Are we not using, for instance, the most effective reading tools to teach reading and mathematics? Are the teachers having low expectations for these students? Do we need to train the teachers to have high expectations and so forth, therefore engage the students more? So but all of these are practice issues. They're not just policy issues. We need to put policies in place to do these things. But ultimately, the rubber hits the road. It's going to be important to change what teachers are doing with these kids in the classrooms. That's where we are going to make the difference. And I think that's where we need to put a lot of attention to, right? And so we really need to identify why is this going on. So we need to do studies and what is the problem here, and then target the solution to that problem. Do you think that positive discrimination can be a solution for underrepresentation? If yes, how can it be fair towards the overrepresented high achiever? I thought I had asked that one already, but what I was saying is, again, that I don't think, right, I guess one way to put this is, I'm not so sure that I would call broadening our base of students positive discrimination. I'm not sure I'd call it discrimination, right? So I'm going to again use the United States as an example, right? We have a situation in the United States whereby some families have more money than others, their parents have more education than others, and so forth. Therefore, the things that they get in their homes, the students whose parents are professionals who have college degrees, university degrees, they are actually able to give more educational press at home to their kids than kids of children whose parents do not have those high educational degrees, whose parents are making less money and are spending more time in work, right? Similarly, many of those people who are coming from poorer families, they live in neighborhoods where the schools that their children go to have less resources. Their teachers may be have less credentials, may not have had as many in-services, right? So what happens is we are having, and so we have a group of students who are in fact getting less, both at home and at school, right? What broadening the base is actually allowing students who are getting less having schools give those students more, right? In other words, to make an example, if perfect education is a 10, right, and there are some students who come from homes where they're getting 5, their home has 5 and the school has 5, what about the students who are coming from a home where the home has 2 and their school has 3? What we are saying is that the schooling for the kids who have less at home, who are bringing less, that those schools need to be giving more so that those kids have the same shot, right? And since those kids are coming in with less to begin with, they are less likely to be placed in gifted programs. So if we do not, in fact, have enrichment programs in school, if we do not have quality programs during the summer for them, where, they will not ever get a chance to demonstrate their gifts and talents, to develop their gifts and talents. The majority of the students who come to our program in the summer, right, and there's a fee to come. It's not a high fee, but there's a fee. Their parents can afford to pay. But we also give scholarships to kids from poorer families whose talents need to develop, but who cannot afford to pay. So that's the idea. So I don't see so it's positive discrimination in the sense, but it's not discrimination in the sense that it's equalizing. We are not taking away from the kids who are already qualifying. We are just giving to more kids so that they can also benefit from these talent development opportunities. So thank you for your questions. Sorry, I was not able to engage with you more directly on the Microsoft Teams platform.
Dear participants, dear ECHA members, I'm sure we would all be glad if all of us present now in this virtual space could actually meet face to face, smile at each other, and discuss the conclusion of the presentations we have heard. But this is a different situation now. Unfortunately, the organizers of the next ECHA conference in Porto are in a situation very similar to ours. A few weeks ago, they had to take a hard decision and to go online. I personally was very sad to hear that because I could hardly wait to meet the ECHA friends again after so many months of seclusion. For a brief break and inspiration, let's take a look now at a short film sent by the organizers of the next Porto conference scheduled for August 2021.
Dear friends and colleagues of European Council for High Abilities, thank you. Thank you for all your kind message following the decision to change the format of the 7th conference into a completely virtual event. Although we were very much looking forward to receiving you all here in Porto, the uncertain current pandemic situation has made us reconsider, and the decision to change our conference into a completely virtual format was taken, together with the European Council for High Abilities General Conference.
To allow more time for authors to share their knowledge and their research results, the deadline to submit the papers for this new virtual conference format is extended until 31 of March. We look forward to receive your contributions.
The program will be built around the conference theme that is even more relevant in the present situation of the world.
It's not the pandemic that is going to stop you from feeling the warmth and kindness of Porto and its citizens in this online conference. We look forward to see you on 31 of August.
We look forward to see you on the 31 of August.
We look forward to see you on 31 of August.